Sam is a freaking ball of light. What the hell?
Hey guys, and welcome to another Ranger Rant. Of course, everyone knows I'm Archer9234.
And you guys finally see me, Dekablue25, coming at you. Today we are going to be talking about the S.P.D. episode 16 and 17, Messenger part 1 and 2. In Dekaranger, there were episode 21, 22, and 23. So mainly much the whole storyline of how it comes in, it was almost similar to Dekaranger, but we just changed everything because...
Yeah, there were certain things that the key differences they changed that you'll find.
Like, the characters are almost the same, but instead, about maybe a quarter of it was changed because of how we put Morgana as part of a villain, and in Dekaranger, she was actually not the villain, the main villain.
And plus, there were censoring issues with the episode.
There were lots of censoring issues. If you guys remember most of it, you know, it's kind of weird how they do it.
So basically, the episode starts off where, you know, Boom somehow invents this machine, and it's like basically... he could listen to the messages from the future and messages from space.
It was like a radio transceiver that it picked up waves from the future. And what happens is that it's a really big device.
He starts going crazy, and he's like, Rangers, I gotta hear the message. And the first thing that came to my mind is like, why isn't he simply calling them to the room? Why are you running around with that humongous thing instead of calling everyone to the room? It would be easier for everyone to go to him instead of him going all over the place.
You see him running around the S.P.D. base, and everyone's like, whoa, what's going on with him? It's like something's really happening with him.
So he runs all over the place inside the S.P.D. base, and then he finally gets into the command room. Finally find out that we hear that this message is from the future, and
that the Cherubian Empire has invaded the S.P.D. base, and
they killed everyone, basically.
Almost everyone dies.
Basically, what kind of bugged me, though, is that after when they found out it was from the future, that Jack was the one who firstly spoke up and said time travel is not possible, and then everyone kind of agreed with him. But they're from the future. They should have they have records from all the past Power Rangers, I assume, because they had the records for Dino Thunder.
But yeah, here's a funny thing that makes it look kind of overlap. Sky's father was wearing a Time Force helmet. He was a ranger.
Yeah, so that automatically proves that S.P.D. was coming from the Time Force suit, so that they were time travelers. So why did they deny it?
The whole S.P.D. kind of thing was kind of weird because how they agree with one thing, then the other thing is like, oh, we
forgot that was involved.
That was kind of like saying to yourself, so you just said you're from the future, but then at one point you're not from the future. Z, who is like, I guess, afraid of time travel or anything,
or she was just shocked that everyone was going to get killed.
Rushed out from the S.P.D. room and into the middle of the streets.
Then we finally go to the villain lair. We're into Grum's ship. Then we find out that Morgana, you know, from the previous episode, she grew up and she turned into this
She's now
fighter.
Apparently an adult/teenager.
I also like to point out that Grum, the actor who played Grum and voiced him in the suit, is also the person who plays Master G. So after this little argument that Morgana and Grum had, we returned to the base, and then we heard Kat say, we have confirmed that this message is from the future. How do you confirm a message from the future that's something that doesn't happen? That made no sense. Then eventually they were informed that Shorty had invaded Earth, and he was currently attacking the city.
Now Z is nowhere near the base because she's actually somewhere else.
So Jack is the one who called her to inform her that they need her, and then before she got able to go meet up with them, Morgana came in.
She's already in the forest, you know, and that's when Morgana pops out, and then she's like, who are you? And that's when Morgana tells, I'm that little girl that you saw, and now I'm an adult. And she morphs into her suit and starts to fight. And then that's when Z morphs, and that's where we see for the first time, we see the Dekaranger episode 21.
The reason why this happened was because in Dekaranger,
she was in like she had a day off, and what happened was that she was painting something, and someone else came up, and she was asking, you know, saying to her, you know, this is how you like to do your free time and this and that. That's when Jasmine realizes that something's wrong with it, because remember, Jasmine is an Esper in Dekaranger. Now, after that, we see Shorty.
Shorty is mainly fighting the four Rangers, and eventually Z joins up with them, and they morph and they have to fight Shorty and Morgana at the same exact time. So while the Rangers are fighting, eventually Morgana comes in with their own personalized robot, and they're basically setting up a thing that the Rangers think they're going to blow up the city with this rocket
thing. Tower thing.
Yeah, so basically she's setting that up. Shorty has the trigger device. He jumps onto an airport building, basically.
Yeah, he jumps onto it, and then
at the last minute, Doggy Kruger helps out at the last minute, although he should have been fighting with them in the beginning. I always thought that was annoying. That why does Kruger always wait until the last minute to fight? So basically, he tries to fight him off, and then he knocks the controller out of Shorty's hand, and then he's basically unable to actually finish him off because the Shadow Saber is ineffective against him.
Yeah, because apparently Shorty's muscles are so freaking huge, even a slash doesn't hurt
it bounces off.
It just bounces off like a little ball bouncing off a wall.
So while at the last minute, Kruger's trying to use the finishing move. Now the weird thing though is that there was a censoring issue with the fire. For some weird reason, Disney doesn't like showing fire. So what they did was they changed the fire color to blue during the finisher wall. In Deca Ranger, of course, Deca Masters is normally yellow. Unfortunately enough, it's ineffective against Shorty, and then Doggy Kruger and them are knocked off the airport tower, and then they're fighting all together.
Now they have every single one of them, all 5 of them, and Doggy Kruger. They're about to just own Morgana and Shorty. They call Rick, and then Rick's about to blast them.
She pulls the trigger on the thing, and then they find out instead of blowing up the city, it shoots out fireworks. Which I also like to point out, it comes from Japan and not from wherever New Tech City is supposed to be. So after a little bit, and they're about to judge them and shoot them at the last second, Devastation comes in and blocks the attack, and unfortunately we get introduced to the third and final character of the group.
Now the funny thing is that they always say, "Oh, Shorty's brother."
Yeah, they do call, we do have Shorty and Devastation that are brothers, but in Deca Ranger, they're actually all related to each other.
All 3 of them are called the Hell Siblings, so they were actually wanted in many galaxies for destroying everything, and Devastator is actually the most powerful one out of all 3. Of course, they're trying to fight him, but they can't do much damage to him because he has a big little rifle gun that can just shoot the crap out of them.
So basically, at the last minute, Devastator was gonna kill them, but at the last minute he said no, let them, let fear set in, and then walked away. So everyone retreats to the base,
and like they're wondering how are we supposed to defeat all 3 of them at the same time? We can't do much about it.
So while they're at the base and they're trying to discuss what could they do, and they're basically giving exposition of like who Devastator is and what he can do, and basically
and then
he's
they
most
look at him as he's the most dangerous villain
in the galaxy. Then his brother's the second most dangerous, and then all of a sudden we see his Shorty, his brother, attacking the city again. So the Rangers run out. Now this is where the second episode of the Deca Ranger 3-parter is actually used. This is the reason why it basically has a fight out of nowhere, right then and there, instead of going to the next part of the episode.
Because Deca Ranger, it was
3 parts.
Part 1. The first part is when they introduced Morgana and Shorty. The second part is when they have
Devastation and then Shorty getting killed.
Yeah, that's what happens.
So basically, we see Shorty eating a building on the screen, and the Rangers come back and then fight him alone. It was always weird though. Devastation and Morgana didn't assist him in this fight. It was
also kind of weird.
It did happen in Deca Ranger, so they were stuck with that.
But in Deca Ranger, it made more sense because Deca Ranger actually said that they're the 3 Hell siblings, so they only need 1, and the other 2 can just relax.
They finally convict Shorty, and they're gonna eventually
the judgment time,
and they're gonna eventually shoot him with Rick. But at the last minute, they shoot him, and then all of a sudden he gets enlarged, and it just didn't make any sense because normally in S.P.D or Deca Ranger, they use robots.
They kill the guy first,
and then they use robots. But in this circumstance, he enlarges it, and it just didn't make any sense. That's because in Deca Ranger, when Murphy's weapon hit his mouth, it made him mad.
He ate
it, and then he enlarged himself. That was the explanation. But in S.P.D, it made no sense whatsoever.
So what happens is that when that happens, is that Jack is saying, well, we need the machines, but Kat says that we can't do it because they were still damaged from the earlier fight they had with Shorty and Morgana.
And they were arguing with Kat, send the machines. Like, you can't.
You can't. They're still in repair. And then we're like, what's going on? How are we going to fight him? So then all you see is Shorty is trying to hammer the Rangers on the floor, and Jack still has Murphy or Rick in his hand in the bazooka mode, just dodging out of nowhere.
So basically, while the Rangers are trying to fight Shorty, they have no other choice but to send the Delta Command. But I also like to point out, whenever they transform to the Delta Command Megazord, you'll always get that one shot where you actually can see the Deca Ranger base itself.
If you guys watch Deca Ranger, then you should know that it is actually the base. What happens is that the base actually for Deca Ranger is just Kruger spins around and the base just closes on them, and that's how you see it. Now in American we did it differently, but we can still see the small little 5.5 second shot of the Japanese base before it actually closes into the real base.
Delta Command Megazord is like the largest Zord they have, but unfortunately Shorty is the one who has that super speed and jumping.
Yeah, so he's just jumping back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
And they can't do anything because the commands like take so long to move, so they're basically screwed. But at the last minute,
we just hear some guy says, "How about I take it from here?" And we're like, "Who are you?" All we see is just a bike coming towards them, and it jumps onto the Deca base. It flies up, and guess what?
So basically, we finally get introduced to the Omega Ranger, and we finally see his new Omega Max Megazord, and he finally finishes off Shorty after
with his sword slasher. So what happens is that Devastator and Morgana are seeing what happening to Shorty, and then we're like, "What? Who is this Ranger here?"
So while Omega Ranger's fighting off Shorty, they do a little bit of a visual effects change between the original Deca Ranger footage. Whenever he forms the swords from the Omega Max cycle, in the original Deca Ranger footage, it was just a simple old-fashioned jump cut.
Oh, it is a 1 and 2.
Yeah, and it looked too cheesy, so for S.P.D they added the little magic effect to cover up the jump cut. That was it, and after that, he defeats Shorty by blowing him up as usual.
So then Morgana and Devastator
are shocked.
On like, what? How can Shorty get defeated? He's so fast. So then you see the Omega Ranger come down, and he's like,
they do that
they did a little thing with like 1, 2, 3, keep on doing it, and then
he finally introduces
he's like, "I'm the Omega Ranger, and you guys are wanted for whatever." Now
and then we're getting kind of hints of like he's from the future because he's like, "I've come a long way
from the future just to defeat you guys." Now, in Deca Ranger, what's really interesting is that Devastator actually says, "You have the gold badge." The gold badge in Deca Ranger means he was a hierarchy than the Deca Rangers themselves. And then we just see him say, "Force from the future," and he does his pose, Omega Ranger.
And then basically after that, Devastator finally takes out his gun and shoots Omega Ranger.
Now the Rangers are shot like, "Oh no, he's gonna get killed." Wait, what the heck just happened? All you see is Omega with his little fist like this. Now, then they say, let me tell you what happened. They use the footage from Deca Ranger, but the thing is that instead of bullets, we change it to pellets.
Yeah, so anytime we ever saw Devastator's weapon being fired in either part 1 or part 2, they were always censoring it and having an energy effect around it. So you wouldn't see the bullets that really...
It was actually not bullets. Now, if you look closely at the footage, you can tell that...
They're bullets. They're just glowing.
All they just did was just made it red and they were glowing. So all you see is just him catching pellets.
And it never made sense. Laser pellets? How do you catch laser pellets? Lasers are energy. You can't catch anything.
So all he says, and he just drops them out. And
it's bullets. It just never made any sense.
And then he uses his Omega Morpher. But the thing that I don't understand is that Omega Ranger had 4 or 5 different modes. All he just said is Omega Ranger.
In Deca Ranger, they explained his brace throttle much more better.
Brace throttle, it was his Sonic Fist, Sonic Hammer, anything like that. You know, it was a lot of different modes that he did, and he actually said how he did it.
And this time, Devastator and Morgana retreat, and then the Rangers finally, go back to the base, and then we finally get introduced to the Omega Ranger.
And then that's when they introduce themselves, and Omega
we find out he's from the future,
Omega,
and he's there to stop everyone.
Omega says that I don't need you guys. You guys have outdated software, and he's being really cocky and a dick to everyone.
So everyone's getting into a heated argument, and then unfortunately Devastator and Morgana come back again.
And then when they were gonna fight, Omega Ranger stops and says, "You're not needed in this time. I can handle it myself." And then that's when Sky, Bridge, Sid, Z, and Jack all agree, like, "Okay,
go ahead.
Let him get his ass on." And
So Omega Ranger finally comes back out with the Unifor Cycle. Although this is what bugs me the most. He's supposed to be from the future.
He has a Cycle.
So how did he bring his Megazord and his Unifor Cycle with him? Are they also energy too? That made no sense whatsoever.
That makes no sense either. And the fact is that they used the Deca Ranger footage of him just on when.
Yeah, what was weird is though when they were doing the Unifor Cycle for us, they did it all for us. They redid the whole scene. But I was like, why didn't you just use the footage that was in Deca Ranger?
Because what happens is that Deca Ranger actually had the Cycle, but what they did is that when the Deca Rangers were in their actually real vehicles, like the Machine Husky, Machine Doberman, and all that, you see Tetsu actually in a screenshot. It was just more like a screenshot. It wasn't really...
We never used the Japanese footage, except for that one shot where we're seeing the big vista of the city being on fire.
Omega comes and starts,
He has to take down Crybots.
So he's like, okay, this is a piece of cake. So you see him doing the pose, doing all the actions.
And then we finally get introduced to his muscle mode.
So after that, what happened was that you see Morgana.
She comes in and then
starts fighting him. She kicks him so hard in the wall. It's like the episode when Bridge actually got hit. But then he's like, oh, that's nothing. He gets up and like...
And it was funny that he comes in and he's spinning around, and then Devastator's like, show off. I'm like, yeah, he is showing off.
But in Deca Ranger, he was actually a show off because Tetsu was being a douchebag anyway in the beginning.
So while Omega Ranger is fighting Morgana, Devastator on the sideline is pulls an evil move and actually attacks Morgana and Omega Ranger at the exact same time. And then we go back to the Delta base, and we find out that the Rangers are going to, after all, go and help him. So while after Devastator attacks Omega Ranger and Morgana, for some reason, disappears into the second half of the fight. Now, the reason why this happened is because in Deca Ranger, he originally killed Succubus and sacrificed her in order to try to kill Dekablue. That's the reason why Morgana just magically vanishes.
And when you do see some Morgana says, "Why are you doing that?"
And then there's no explanation why she doesn't continue fighting. She just disappears.
She just randomly goes back to base. So the footage is when the Rangers are coming to Omega. Omega's like, "Why are you guys here? I don't need you here. I can handle this myself, you know?" But apparently the Rangers want to show him that...
Well, they're abiding by his rule that he saved them, so in return they have to save him at this time.
Devastator
does his Fury Circle again.
His Fury Circle. This time he traps all the Rangers. Now Omega... So Jack pushes Omega out of the way, and then Omega's like, "What are you doing?" That's when we have the we can do anything moment. And
but I want to point out this scene when they're doing, that emotional, dramatic moment where they're breaking free of Devastator's weapon. It was much more better in Deca Ranger.
Deca Ranger, you actually see...
It was much more emotional, and then Tetsu was it was more of a journey for him rather than Omega just like randomly just saying, "Oh yeah, they are right. This way is better," and it was just really quick.
So and the funny thing is that that's actually the final part of Deca Ranger when we see the Rangers coming in and Omega kicking ass. That's when this is where the last part of Deca Ranger comes in which when the Rangers are inside the whole Devastator Fury Circle.
That's when the episode. That's where part 2 originally ended.
And that's when part 3 comes into play. So what happens is that they break free from his Fury Circle, and then Omega's like, "Oh wow, you guys are actually right."
So he finally accepts the other 5, and this is the point where he finally joins the team.
Now instead, in Deca Ranger, what happens is that Tetsu's like, "Oh, so it's actually not power; it's more like you care for someone." And Deca Ranger had a whole scenery of that because they wanted to show Tetsu that we are not, even though we are lower ranked than you, we can still do what we can. We protect the Earth for a reason. And that's when Tetsu realizes that, friends are actually good to have because Tetsu was an elite. And an elite, they didn't have friends, they have no emotions, no nothing.
This is the first and I think only time where
Omega
do the judgment. So after that, we finally get his judgment.
We finally see him judgment mode, and then Devastator's like, "I am not going to get away. I'm going to get away from here." So what happens is...
He was judged guilty, and both the Rangers and Omega do their finishing move and blow him up. Unfortunately, though, Devastator, after he was killed, did another Fury Circle somehow and revived themselves. It was better explained in Deca Ranger because he had this extra power to revive, and then after he escaped into Morgana's original robot.
And so now, what's really interesting is that how does Cat say, "Oh, your Omega Cycle is also on the way too"? That kind of didn't make sense because we didn't see the Omega Cycle go into the base at all.
Yeah, I never understood how the Zord Bay had extra room for the bike. Even in Deca Rangers or S.P.D, it's just never clearly explained how that was dealt with.
So what happens is that we just see we see all of them, and then the Rangers form the Delta Squad Megazord, aka the Deca Ranger Robo.
While Omega's coming in with the bike, Jack at the last minute takes the Delta Squad and jumps onto Omega's bike, and then
he's like, arguing. "Hey, you can't do that." It's like, "Shut up and quiet down and just keep driving." In Deca Ranger, it was actually more funny because Tetsu was like, "I can handle this, don't worry, you guys are not fast enough." That's when Ban says, "No, you don't," and he jumps on it to make a funny joke out of it.
Now, this Megazord fight was shortened for S.P.D because, again, this was the second part and we're almost at the end of the episode, but this was the third episode and like near the middle part of the episode in Deca Ranger.
So what happens is that the Rangers are shooting him, and then they're
going through the city.
You hear Z say, "Freeze, S.P.D, stop," and then you hear her say, "Why don't they ever listen?" And that's when Devastator comes back and starts shooting them. Now, what's funny is that this time we actually kept the footage of when the
buildings were some of the original buildings were allowed
blowing up.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like wondering.
There was some stuff cut out because remember when Devastator turned around and were shooting through the hole of the buildings. We didn't know how that pileup happened. It was just there. They shortened that scene because, again, we're having censored issues because of 9/11, and we can't show buildings being blown up. That was the reason why the episode where Shorty, remember, he attacked and his line said, I don't like empty buildings. That was just in order to say that, there's no one in there. In reality, though, people are getting killed.
So when Devastator is firing, the Rangers actually say, whoa, watch out. And they actually see the bike and the Megazord spin, and then they actually go to him again. Now this time, what's interesting is that they take it up to the sky, and now Devastator is still where are they? Where'd they go? And what's really interesting is that since we show them the fight, all we see is them flying in the air, and then you see them shooting down with the bike. We just see him use the maximum charge to destroy him, and then that's it.
Blew up. What was funny though is that when the scene ended, he was destroyed, right? But in S.P.D, normally they have the scene where the containment card flies out of the explosion, and you're supposed to pick it up. For some reason, they never showed that, and at the end of the scene, they had to simply add in a little bit where they said, "We still have to contain him." Didn't you just blow him up? How could you contain him after you blew him up? That made no sense. That line.
Oh, so then finally after they finish, Boom comes in and be like, "Oh, we have another message," and instead it's actually a happy message that
it was just
elevator music.
Now I want to point out a big plot issue with this radio. If Boom can listen to any radio from the future, why doesn't he figure out how Grum was defeated and simply defeat them faster? He could literally finish the entire series with this radio. And Omega himself too. Because at this point, you can see that they don't care about changing the future. So why don't you just simply rewrite the ending of the episode and just simply catch Grum right then and there?
So then...
It's a big plot problem that's just never resolved.
So then, of course, what happens is that they actually... Kruger says, oh, so you came and helped us from the future. We thank you very much on that.
And then we find out he's unable to go back to the future.
And he's like, well, you can't go back to the future now. Oh, don't worry, I can stay here. And then Sky, being a nice guy instead of being a douchebag in the beginning of S.P.D, he says, come on, we'll show you around.
And then we finally get revealed who Omega is.
And then he's like, oh, don't worry, I've known this area my whole life. I used to live here as a kid. And then he finally realizes, you guys know me as Sam. And then everyone's like, Sam?
Yeah, and
then we see a little clip of Sam, the little kid Sam, in the beginning of S.P.D. That's when Sam also turns himself into a freaking ball of light.
And so finally everyone runs off.
And it's like everyone's like, see you guys later, and he runs off. And then everyone starts running after him, and all you see Kruger is just he's laughing.
So basically, overall, I have to give the episode, 3 out of 5. I would have given it more, but there all those continuity issues where did Morgana go? There was no explanation to that, and the lack of Sam as a ball of light.
That's the only complaint I have in S.P.D. in general, because
the reason why this happened was because S.P.D. was they were over budget, so they couldn't actually afford an actor to play Sam. That's the reason why he was just simply a voice actor. It's cheaper to pay a voice actor rather than playing an on-camera actor.
Sam's ball, that's the only regret I have, because, it's a ball circling around everyone, and even later on in the
He wasn't used. That's the main complaint. He wasn't used. He was not focused on. He barely had any important things.
All he did was, you see the Rangers talk, but all you see is a ball of light just circling around them, and then he talks. It looks kind of weird in a way how he says, yeah, let's do this. The episode would have been better if we actually kept Sam as a real human being. And
that reminds me, we never got an interaction between old Sam and Kid Sam. Kid Sam never returned from the series at that point.
Yeah, it was kind of strange because Sam was still living in the S.P.D.
Yeah, he's there. So why not have... you can't tell... Obviously, they can't tell him he's the future Sam, because that would screw everything up. But you could still have them talk to each other without knowing.
Oh, who is it? He could have walked into the room and be like, hey, who's this Ranger?
So what do you guys think about this episode? Did you personally like it? Because, it was pretty action-oriented. We did get good stuff. But did you also hate it because Sam wasn't really explained that well? Or do you think Sam... could have been, or was too much of a spotlight in this episode? What do you guys particularly think?
Or do you think that Deca Ranger was actually much more better in how the storyline was explained with Tetsu compared to Sam?
Always, again, leave your comments below and leave your suggestions below of what future episodes you would like me to review. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you right back here next week.
Just like in Mystic Force, where in S.P.D. Kruger was John Tui, and in Mystic Force he was Daggeron. So that's actually the second time we actually have someone that is from another series that did a voice and then came in a real life person.
Normally in a Power Ranger fight, they would lose their energy and they would demorph, and they would be unable to morph for a certain amount of time. But in this particular episode, they morphed 3 times in a row without so why did you bother demorphing?